All right, mate, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of IMO. Today, we are talking about the issue of racism. It would be impossible for you to not have heard some kind of conversation about this over the last few weeks with what's happened in America and subsequently spread across the world. Not just the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been around for a while, but particularly the death or murder of George Floyd and the effects that's had. And the conversations it's starting. It's conversations I've been trying to have on this channel for a little bit, and I'm hoping to add to it in some way today. So we're going to talk about whether I think, and we think, UK sport may be racist. If it is, how it can change that going forward. So that's what we're going to do in today's IMO. Here we go then. So, racism. Unfortunately, it's an issue I've had to talk about a few times on this channel. You may have seen my video I made a few, probably 6 months ago or so now, about the issue in Bulgaria, with the England-Bulgaria game, where there was some racism. You may have seen some tweets I've done recently. I'm going to start off actually by talking about the fact that I've seen a lot of people use their platforms for this, which I think is great, and these conversations, regardless of their own, ethnic background. One thing I've seen a lot of people do is say, if you're racist and you don't like what I'm saying, feel free to unfollow me. And whilst I do agree with that, in the sense that I'm not particularly bothered about having a certain amount of followers, and I have seen some followers leave, actually, on Twitter, particularly when I've been outspoken recently about racism and about Donald Trump in America. What I will add to that is, I don't want to just close the door on racist people, okay? I don't want to just say, you don't agree with me, so I'm going to ignore you now. I want to create the conversation so we can educate people and make them not think that way, okay? Because I don't believe anyone is born racist, and I think it's a illness that can be cured. If someone's got an illness, let's talk about the pandemic as an example, right? Because this is another kind of pandemic. Raheem Sterling said it himself. He called racism a pandemic. When you get overwhelmed with the amount of people who feel a certain way, i.e. ill from a coronavirus, you don't just close the door on them and say, well, let's just let you die, so then we'll all be healthy, right? We try and fix them. And I think that's quite important. So if you are racist, and very few people would admit to being it, but if you maybe disagree with some of the things I'm going to say in today's video, some of the stuff I've said online recently, and you feel strongly about that, I am going to open up some questions at the end and we can talk. All I'll ask you is to keep it respectful, but if you have a strong opinion, freedom of speech is a thing, I want to engage with it, and I'll maybe tell you why I feel differently. But it's important to have these conversations, and these conversations, as I say, I've been having for a while. I'm going to show you a tweet I did, which is kind of a catalyst for this conversation I want to have, particularly about sport, because that's our area here on this channel. This is a tweet I did in 2018, so I'm going to show it to you now. I got a bit of stick for it, got a little bit, not a lot. Some people understood what I was trying to say. I saw this old school Panini picture of 2017-2018 La Liga Managers, okay? Now, these are all the managers when they were footballers. So it's their stickers from when they were footballers. At the time, they were managers. So you can see Zinedine Zidane here at the time as the manager of Real Madrid. This is a picture of him when he played for Cannes in France, okay? Now, I reacted to this because even though Spain is a different demographic to the UK, and they maybe are less diverse in some ways, I made a reaction to this tweet, and I said, just reminds us how much work there's still to do on the diversity in football, particularly for managers. They all look the same. So I looked at this and I thought, they're all white, dark hair. They pretty much look the same to me. They look kind of like me, to be honest. Maybe a bit more tanned, because they're from Spain, most of them. And that got an interesting reaction from a lot of people. I even said here, some of the replies to this highlight why we have such a problem. Because one of the things people say a lot when they see stuff like this, they say, well, it shouldn't just say there has to be black people in a job. It should be the best candidate. Now, that's a common mistake, or a common response I see from people saying, we haven't got enough people of colour or people from a BA background in a certain position. They go, we shouldn't be creating quotas or anything. We should give the best people the job. You never hear someone who's trying to push for more diverse people in jobs say, don't give the best people the job. These two things are not mutually exclusive. Of course, the best people should get the job. This is what I'm trying to say to you. If that's your response to when I say something like this, why are all the La Liga managers white? Or I show you a tweet that I did just this week. In fact, it was actually a retweet, which is all about how the governing bodies of UK's major sports institutions have very few black people on their boards. Okay? We'll go through it in detail in a minute. But if you are one of the people that will respond to a comment like this by saying, there's no need to get black people on there necessarily, it should be the best people for the jobs, you're missing the point. You're completely missing the point. Okay, no one is suggesting you give people jobs just to be the token black guy, for want of a better phrase. No one is suggesting that. We're saying if, in this case, the Football Association, if the Football Association's 11 board members, and in that case, the best man or woman for the job always got it, then why weren't any of them black? Why are the best people for the job not black? And it's not a coincidence. 0 black people from 11 on the Football Association board. 0 black people from 12 on the Lawn Tennis Association. 0 from 12, England and Wales Cricket Board. 0 from 14, England Rugby Football Union. 0 from 12 in the Swim England board. 1 from 9 in UK Athletics. 0 from 6, England Hockey. 0 from 12 in the British Cycling. 0 from 7 in Rugby Football League. 0 from 12 in the England Golf Board. 0 from 11 in the British Horse Racing Authority. 2 from 11 on the Sport England board. And no one out of the 10 people on the UK Sport board are black. Now we're going to go into talk about percentages and demographics in a minute. Why are none of these people, the best people for the job, black? I'll tell you why. The issue is not, as some people would say, and I'll show you actually, I'll show you some responses actually. Look at this tweet here. Now I don't want to shame anyone, I don't want anyone going after anyone on Twitter. It's not what I'm trying to do, I'm just trying to show you the conversation. So I retweeted this, got a man called Lee Moore shared it, I retweeted it. Here's an idea. What if the people in charge are the most qualified for the jobs? My response, here's an idea. If that was the case, why would it be? I.e., why would the best people for the jobs not be black? Okay? And it creates a whole different conversation. Same man again. The people in charge, whites, might have more interest in having these roles, more experience, higher education, a whole number of factors. I'm not saying the role should all be white, but the people who want the role have to have the best qualifications. So I completely agree with him in the second part here. The people who get the job should have the best experience and qualifications. But the fact is, they're not black. Now, where he's shot himself in the foot, in my opinion, this person, is they have said, maybe they might have more interest in these roles. First of all, go and say that to a room of black people who are very qualified, and there's plenty of them that want to get jobs in football, for example. We'll concentrate on football because that's our area, and say they don't want the jobs. Because that's absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense, right? And then this bit is the bit that hurts me. They might have more experience and higher education. You're exactly right. They do have more experience and higher education. Why? This is where knowledge of systemic racism comes in. Now, the issue is not we're not giving enough rubbish black people the jobs. The issue is we're not producing enough talented black people. Or well, there are plenty of talented ones, but they're not getting the appropriate experience to be judged to be talented in this CV criteria situation. Because they don't get the opportunities in the first place. They don't get the educations. They don't go to the schools that are funded in the same way. They don't get into the universities at the same rate. So it's about education. It's not just about the education of the people who are black who aren't getting the education. It's about the education of the white people in understanding why they're so privileged and why I am so privileged. Okay? And the point I really want to make here is I didn't grow up in a particularly diverse area. I grew up where I am right now in Essex. Okay? My best friend growing up was someone you know on the channel, Faisal Manji. He was the only Asian person or any person that wasn't white on our football team. In fact, I was there and I witnessed him receive racist abuse at a number of different games. And in the opponent, in the opposition team, there'd be no one that was a different colour either. I didn't grow up in intercity where there's a lot of black guys around. I didn't have a lot of black friends growing up. That's not because I didn't want to. They just weren't around me. I was lucky enough to develop a worldly view, what you want to call it, a knowledge of this stuff through my own interests. Okay, I grew up listening to people like Bob Dylan, who sing a lot about civil rights movement and about the unjust treatment of black people, such as the song Hurricane, which is about the famous boxer who was put away for life and ultimately freed, Reuben Carter, unfairly. He makes a song about Emmett Till, who's been talked about a lot recently. He was killed. He has a song called Oxford Town, which is about another killing innocently of a black man. Unfortunately, Bob Dylan made a lot of songs about that issue. So I grew up listening to stuff like that. I say grew up, I discovered him at university. So I didn't grow up. I discovered Bob Dylan at university. I studied a lot of American literature at university. When I studied English literature, I did modules in American literature. So I read a lot about this issue. I actually did a dissertation on racism. So my dissertation was on the comparison of the poems of a man called Langston Hughes, who's a famous black poet, compared to the representation of African American people by white authors. Okay, so I've studied and I've been interested in this topic for a while. The reason I'm telling you this It's not to try and make me sound like a good lad. It's the opposite. I'm saying that for most people that have grown up where I live, which isn't a million miles from London, but it isn't in London, which is more diverse, they have not had the ability to have this education. So I want to use my platform, if I can have any kind of role in this conversation. You know, there's much more educated and experienced people on this issue that can talk about it on a big level. But for my situation with the audience I have and the world of football, if I can bring anything to it, it's to try and maybe educate a few people to think a little bit differently. Okay? So I don't want people to feel like they've got to be in one camp and hate everyone else who thinks differently to them. But I want you to engage in people. So if you believe in what I'm saying, you agree with what I'm saying, I want to task you to go out there. And when you hear people raise things such as this lad has, who says it's kind of basically denying the existence of inherent societal institutionalized racism, just throwing it away like that, and doesn't understand their own white privilege. And the white privilege is a whole different phrase you've got to get your head around. It's not saying that you are privileged in life. You might be from poverty yourself, but just being white gives you an advantage over a black man. It shouldn't, but it does. A woman. It does. And you have to understand that. There's a great documentary or a film you can watch on Netflix called The 13th, about the 13th Amendment, also known as the Emancipation Proclamation, which will tell you how even with the illegalization of slavery in America at the end of the Civil War, which wasn't that long ago, by the way, black people have kind of been made slaves through the prison system, which meant that you could still be a slave if you were in prison. And as a result of that, we've seen prison numbers go up to a huge amount. Huge percentage of the American population are in prison, and a huge percentage of those people imprisoned are black. And there's an economical argument as to why that's being done. I want to talk about football. And I want to go back to that image I showed you, this number of black board members thing. Now, I want to show both sides of the argument, and I want to acknowledge what other people might say. So did you know that 3% of the UK are black? Only 3%. Okay? So if I say to you only 3% are black, and you apply that same percentage to, for example, the Football Association, you might say, well, if you're doing a demographic representation, proportionally speaking, you don't necessarily need a black person on there. You might say that because, you know, roughly there's not 10, there's 11. But if there was 10, if one was black, that would mean 10% of the board was black when only 3% of the country is black. So you could argue it's okay to not have a black person on the board. Let me show you something else. Exclusive research carried out by TalkSport reveals that in the opening weekend of the first Premier League season, there were 218 British players across all starting lineups, British players, 36 of whom were from BAME backgrounds. That's black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. 36 of 218 were black. That's 16.5%. So the point I'm making is much more than 3% of football are black in this country. And for the 2017-18 season, this article's a few years old now, that had doubled to 33%. So 1/3 of the UK players playing in the Premier League a couple of years ago were black. 1/3. Not 3%, 1/3. While prone to great fluctuation, the proportion of appearances made by BAME players rose from 7% at Euro 96, i.e. 7% of England's team, squad, were black at Euro 96, to 50% at Euro 2012. So 50% of the people that played for England were black. Half of the team. So the point I'm making is this, guys. Much more than 3% of the footballers, the British footballers in this country, are black. We're looking at more around the 30% mark. Okay? In England's case, we've fielded teams where half of the English team are black. How can the Football Association have 0 black board members? 0. What happens when they finish playing football? Why do they not get the opportunities? Why can I count the number of black Premier League managers on one hand? How can such a small percentage be managers when that many are players? This is where you've got to be really careful, guys, okay? Because if you start using dangerous language and you start saying things like maybe they don't want to be managers, maybe they're not very suited to be managers, what are you talking about? It's a numbers game. It's just a statistical impossibility. There isn't people that want to be managers that are black. They do not get the chances. And in many cases, it's because of experience. Look at Sol Campbell. Sol Campbell's been outspoken many times about his lack of experiences as a manager. Now, I'll say some things that might be unpopular here, but the Sol Campbell's, Macclesfield, he managed for one season. He actually kept them up against the odds and then left, and he managed Southend where he currently is, okay? I'm not going to sit here and say Sol Campbell's the best manager in the world. I've met Sol Campbell. I've worked with Sol Campbell. I know he's very passionate about managing, and I wish him the best. Why was his first opportunity at Macclesfield? His first jobs. Regardless of how he performs in those jobs, we'll get to that later. We're talking about opportunities to become a manager. Because if you have one bad go as a manager, it might ruin your career forever. So Sol Campbell saved them and kept them in League 2, avoiding them getting relegated to the National League. Okay, so he came in at League 2. Steven Gerrard, his first job, Rangers, a great Scottish team, one of the best Scottish teams of all time. And Frank Lampard, his first job, Derby, and now he's at Chelsea, okay? Why did Sol Campbell start in League 2 and Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard start in the Championship and the Scottish Premier League? Now, let me tell you something about Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard. I've met them both. I've worked with them both. I've got a lot of time for both of them. I respect them both hugely. I think they definitely deserve the chances they get, and they're going to be great managers. Frank Lampard particularly is a very impressive human being. It is cut from a different cloth when it comes to footballers. He's very well educated, and you know, I've got nothing against him having that opportunity at Chelsea. He's earned every moment of it. Sol Campbell started in League 2. Do you know how much harder it is to make a good reputation for yourself as a manager in League 2? As opposed to when you start at Rangers, when you know there's only one team you're competing with in the league. No disrespect to other Scottish teams, but it's Rangers or Celtic. So you're pretty much going to finish second or better. Okay? And Derby, of course, Championship's a very, very tough league. Frank Lampard got them to the playoffs. Very close to getting up. Would have been amazing if he'd done that. But he had a team and he had the connections that could allow him to put together a playoff push. Sol Campbell went to Macclesfield and saved them from relegation to the conference. He actually inherited a team which was tipped for relegation. But if he'd got them relegated, he would have had that on his record forever, that he relegated a team to the conference. That would have been his first bit of experience. Do you know how much harder it is to then go and get a job in the Championship, in the Scottish Premier League, in the Premier League? He's had to go to Southend United now. Why is that? Now, I'm not necessarily saying the chairmans of these clubs are racist. Okay, I very much hope that's not the case. But it is about experience, and it is about how much more competition Sol Campbell is having to face from white people, because there isn't enough black people coming through to management positions. Now, this is something, it's called a Rooney Rule, actually. There's actually a rule for this, not to be confused with Wayne Rooney. The Rooney Rule is a rule in the National Football League that requires league teams to interview ethnic minority candidates for head coaching and senior football operation jobs. It doesn't make them give them the job, but it's a form of affirmative action, and it means that they have to interview them. So it's a start. Okay? You don't want a world where you're giving people jobs for the sake of it and you're missing out on great other people because of some quota. But by having to interview them, you then get them in the room. And once someone's in the room, they can impress you and they can convince you into giving them a job. So it's a start. I'm for the Rooney Rule, personally. A lot of people don't like affirmative action or positive discrimination, as it can be known. You know, somebody was saying affirmative action is racist. Do you need to be racist against white people in order to counteract what's happened over the last few hundred years? No, I don't think you do. The best person should get the job. And that Rooney Rule is only saying that someone has to be interviewed. Take you back to this image again. If you can tell me that's right, then I'd love to have a conversation with you. There's some sports in there that aren't traditionally played by a lot of black people. What percentage of black people play golf, for example? What percentage of black people are regular swimmers? What percentage of black people are playing tennis? But you can't just look at it like that. Why aren't they playing tennis? Why aren't they swimming as much? Why aren't they playing golf? In some cases they are, by the way. In some cases people think that people don't like these sports. It's absolute nonsense. It's so mind-boggling to me when people don't understand this problem. And it is about education. It's not that they don't want to play golf, which is what some people would tell you. They don't want to play golf. They don't like swimming. These are ridiculous statements, okay? They don't have the opportunities to do it. Do you know what a privilege it is to get to play golf as a kid? How much money you have to have. You have to buy a set of golf clubs. And my brother's a very, very keen golfer. He loves it. And I had the opportunity to be a golfer too. My dad took me to play golf. I had a set of golf clubs growing up. I was very lucky. Okay? One thing I don't like about golf, and I know they're trying to work on this, but I don't like the elitism, and I don't like the etiquette, old school rules they have, that in my opinion are just ways of keeping certain people out of golf. It's not a case they don't want to do it. Maybe they won't feel comfortable going because they haven't got the money to buy good clubs. They haven't got money to pay for a big membership. And why haven't they got the money? This is all back to systemic racism again. They're growing up in areas that are traditionally not with a lot of job opportunities. They're not getting good educations. They're not getting to go to the best schools. It's all related, but guys, it snowballs from the moment they're born. And you have to educate yourself as a white person. Now, someone's just said in the chat, what about poor white people? Yes, 100%. that could be the same for a white person. They could be born in a bad area. They could not go to a good school. And they don't get a good experience. The point I'm making is they still have it better than a poor black person. That's what white privilege is. So you are looked at differently. The world does discriminate in the colour of people's skin, and that is the problem. Now, listen, I'm never going to come on here and slate my parents because I love my parents and I've been very lucky to be brought up with the best parents. They brought me up, they gave me loads of opportunities, they let me make a lot of key decisions about my own life growing up, and I'm never going to complain about my upbringing, right? But, and this is partly due to the area that I grew up in, this is partly due to the time that I grew up in, but one thing that I will change when I'm a parent, and I urge other parents that watch this to do, is I was never actively educated to not be racist. Okay, no one ever told me to be racist, and no one ever influenced me in racist ways, and I was lucky in that regard. But no one ever sat me down and told me why racism is wrong. No one ever sat me down at a young age and said, this is why you can't think like this. This is why you've got to look out for these people, and we have a responsibility to correct the wrongdoings of our forefathers. Okay? No one ever did that. We have to do that going forward to our children. We have to sit down with them, because no one is born a racist. For me, I've never met, and I maintain, I'm sure I'll be told otherwise, but I maintain you'll never meet a well-educated and someone with good sense of morals racist. I've actually made a Venn diagram. It's a bit basic, so I apologise for that. If you have someone who's well brought up in terms of morals and is taught right from wrong, who understands to look out for their fellow man and love thy neighbour and all that good stuff, and they're well educated in terms of the way the world works, in terms of the history of the world, in terms of the history of oppression in the world, in America, in England, everywhere across the world. Because England are nowhere innocent in all this. It's not about America being the bad guys. We're bad too. If you have someone well brought up and well educated, they won't be racist. I don't believe it's possible. You get loads of people who have good education who are racist because they haven't got the right morals. And you get some really good people that don't quite understand the history of the world and the way things have worked, who can still end up racist. But if you get them both, you won't get a racist. And it's our job to create those people. It's our job as future parents, as educators, to our friends, to anyone, to make sure they know all the things they need to not be racist. I know that is a very basic thing. So I want to open up some questions now. I know I've covered a lot of things there, and a lot of it you might disagree with a lot of it. These are my opinions. This is what you get on this show. And I will ask you to appreciate that I'm talking about a sensitive issue here. I have to be very careful in what I say, because there's a lot of people out there who want to pick certain words someone says or a certain phrase they say and turn it against them, you know. There's very little for me to gain from having this conversation. That's not why I'm doing it. It's because I want to try and use this platform to make people better. A lot of you guys, I'm sure, if you've stuck around watching my videos this long, you probably have a similar outlook on life to me if you put up with my various rants in the past. So a lot of I'm probably preaching to the converted in many ways. But there might be one or two of you watching that just get a little moment in this video that maybe doesn't even resonate now. Maybe it takes a few months or even a few years and you think back to it. And if I can do that for the world, I'm happy. Okay? Ben Rigdon's brought something up which is quite interesting. Have you heard that the Premier League now, for the first games, are not going to have players' names on the back and it's going to say Black Lives Matter instead? I think it's good that the Premier League is recognising that. And that's a great gesture, but it needs to be backed up with proper actions. You know, when are we going to see the first chief executive of the Premier League that's black? It says a lot about England that we were quite ahead of times in terms of having a women prime minister. We've had two now. But America are ahead of us in the fact that they've had a black president and we haven't. I know there's a higher percentage of the American population that are black and therefore more likely to vote for a black president. But why should the colour matter? I'm white. I haven't got an issue with us having a black prime minister. Surely you haven't got to be black to vote for a black person. So the fact that we have a smaller percentage of people that are black in the country should have no real say on whether we have a black prime minister. Because you're then implying that white people only vote for white people, which means we're a racist country. I could be wrong, but I can't remember England ever having a black candidate. Why didn't you employ a black manager at hashtag? This is a really good question from Jay, and I'm really happy that you asked it, Jay. So we have actually got a black manager at hashtag now. We've recently appointed a reserve manager called Kiernan, who is of black colour. I'm not expecting any special praise for that. I just think it's important to note that. It's only the second managerial appointment I have made as a chairman, and it is a person of colour. He's not got it because he's black. Got it because he deserves it. It was highly recommended. And hopefully he's going to do great for the club. But we have got a black manager at hashtag. The first manager I brought in, and this is part of the problem in many ways. So we'd never had a manager before, right? Hashtag United. I knew we needed one for us to kick on and play non-league. I couldn't do it. Even if I wanted to do it, I couldn't have done it. And I'd been our only manager before that. And I went to who I knew. I went to the club that I know, where my dad's been a physio, and to a man that I knew and trusted, who you all know now is Devs. And I didn't offer him the job right away. I asked him to come down and help us, because he was one of the few people in that level of football that I knew could help. So I invited him down. It resonated with him. He was very keen to be part of it. It was the obvious choice for me to make him manager. I'll be honest, I have thought since then, with the way I feel about the world, am I a hypocrite for not actively going out and employing a black manager for #United? You know, to actively try and solve the problem. And I don't have a problem with it personally. You know, you can call me a hypocrite if you want, but my issue is not, and I've said this many times in this video, my issue is not that people need to go and hire black managers and not white managers until it's 50-50. Like, I'm not saying that. The issue is maybe more that it's interesting that when I went to what I knew, and I think about the coaches that I know and the people that I know personally that I can trust, because that's a big issue, handing over control of #. I needed to give it to someone I know and trust. All the people I can think of in football that have influenced me, captains of teams I've played for, managers of teams I've played for, coaches of teams I've played for, PE teachers at school, not a single black man. Is that my fault? I don't think it is. Is it a demographic thing about the area I've grown up in? I think it's mostly that. If I grew up in London, for example, I'd have played with a lot more black people growing up. I would have probably had more black coaches growing up. It would have been a different situation. But the country, unfortunately, doesn't have the representation. So that's the reason the first manager hired by # isn't black. But the second manager I've ever hired is. And I do want to help be part of that solution. And that's not just about black people either. That's about all parts of football. I've said many times I'd love to have an openly gay footballer at #. I'm talking about men here because we've got many openly gay footballers in our women's team. You know, and the women's football is completely different when it comes to matters of sexual persuasion. No one really cares in women's football what you do. But in men, we still struggle in professional football to have an openly gay footballer. So I'd be we actually had one before. You know, our first ever goalkeeper was a gay man at #United. That's not the reason he was on the team. He was a friend of mine. He's still a friend of mine. He moved away, he lives in America now. But I would be very opening to that. And any people of any ethnicity that aren't necessarily getting the chances, as long as they're good enough. That is important, they're good enough. But I think you can do both. I know the FA could say, we would love to make our board more diverse, and then hire someone that is definitely good enough. You're telling me there aren't people of colour that could add something to the FA board? You're mental if you think that. And I think there's two sides to that. And I get why people are asking me that question, right? It's like, you know, on one side, if someone's going to go out and preach something, you should be held accountable to it. I get that. Same with Dominic Cummings recently. You know, he's telling everyone to stay indoors, yet he's driving off to Barnard Castle. Like, yeah, sure. I do get it. But don't let that be your only argument. I brought this up in the stream the other day. Like, don't let your only defense of something, if maybe you're feeling a little bit accused, because I've not directed my attack at a single person during this stream. I'm not aimed at anyone. It's aimed at a way of thinking that I don't know who has it, but someone watching might. And maybe you might feel a little bit defensive because of the way you've fought in the past or something you've said. But don't let your only defense be, well, he does it. Well, he doesn't do it, so why should I? You know, if you develop a super philosophy where the only way you can be criticised is if you're criticised by a perfect person, guess what? You will never get any criticism because no one is perfect. I'm certainly not, and you aren't either. Whoever this is watching this. Don't be that guy that can only be criticised by the perfect person, because you'll never be criticised. Should players walk off the pitch due to racism no matter what? Ben Rigdon. Well, I think what's more important than that question is they should feel that they're protected from racism. So it shouldn't come down to the player. If the referee hears or witnesses it, they should be enforcing it. The player should never have to be put in a position to make that decision. Yes, 3Stan Squash has made a good point. He says the board conversation can be a lot broader. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes there's only one woman on the board as well. I think the conversation goes beyond racism. It's outright discrimination. Yes, it's definitely an old boys club as well. I don't know the numbers on women, and I am as passionate about that as well. It's not just about race. It should be different genders represented as well. There's no doubt that the powerful positions in society have and continue to be dictated by white males. EGB Bennett, it's a good point. He says, how can black managers not be undermined by knowing they might be a hire because of their colour? We're talking about the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule doesn't require you to hire anyone. It requires you to interview them. So if you then be hired, it's because that person wants you in the job. And that's all you need to know. It's like saying, how can the Queen do her job seriously, knowing that she got the gig because her dad was the king? I mean, don't get me started on the monarchy. I think if we can all sit there and have a queen to rule over us because she came out of a certain woman's vagina, then I think we can all agree to give some black people some more jobs when they're so criminally understaffed, as long as they're deserving of it. That is where I'm going to end this discussion on racism in British sport, and I've gone a little bit off piece at points there, but just trying to get some of my thoughts across to you guys and create a discussion. Continue it in the comments, you know. Keep it peaceful. If you disagree with what I'm saying, that's fine. You're still welcome here to have that discussion if you keep it peaceful and you guys trade ideas between each other, because you're going to educate each other and it's all going to have a good end result, as long as it's done in a respectful fashion, okay? Drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed this different video talking about a topic that I really hope there will come a time soon where I no longer need to make videos about. I myself am going to pledge to do more not just in my career and my job, my content, but in my life, because this is not an issue of just for black people. This is a world issue. It's as bad for white people as it is for black people, because we are, in many ways, either the guilty party or the recipient of the beneficial situation created by racist people. And it's been continued, accidentally in many cases, for far too long. It's our job to cut it out. Even if it hurts our back end a little bit, it has to be done now. Come on, it's time to stop. Subscribe for more. Lots of videos coming to the channel. And follow me on Twitch if you want to see these things happen live. Until next time, don't go changing.